We're keeping the momentum going with an incredible lineup of panelists for our next discussion, Extreme Innovation, AI-Enabled Discoveries. Here to introduce our panelists and moderate the conversation is Dr. Helena Wisniewski, FNAI Fellow, Marion Porter Endowed Chair and Chair of Marketing, Management, Logistics, and Business Analytics, as well as Professor of Entrepreneurship at the University of Alaska, Anchorage. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Wisniewski to the stage.
Well, this is a very exciting panel because artificial intelligence is a force pushing the boundaries of what's possible. In addition to my introduction, I also started the first AI lab in Alaska, the Alaska Data Science and AI Lab, because AI is one of my favorite topics. It actually started when I was at DARPA, and I was actually directing development of neural networks and other technologies and pushing the boundaries there. And then my career also spans industry at Lockheed. I also served at the CIA and launched 12 startups. So today's panel brings together leading experts to explore groundbreaking innovations that not only advance the field, but also improve lives. The panel is about more than just technology, it's about the future and how we're actually shaping it. So let's meet the panel. We have Dr. Gideon Myles. He's the Chief IP Counsel. OpenAI specializes in all aspects of IP, including development of day-to-day execution of patent, trademark, and open source strategies, policies, and procedures. He was previously a software engineer at Apple and IBM Research, and he holds a PhD in computer science. So welcome. We also have Dr. Larry Heck. He's a fellow of the National Academy of Inventors, and he's a professor at Georgia Tech with joint appointments in the School of Electrical and Computer Engineering and the School of Interactive Computing, the Reza S. Farmer Jr. Advanced Computing Concepts Chair, and a Georgia Research Alliance Eminent Scholar. He spent 30 years in industry as a scientist at various corporations, including SRI, Microsoft, and Google, and Samsung. He's an alum at Georgia Tech and the recipient of the Distinguished Engineer Award from Texas Tech University. Dr. Anant Madabhushi is the Robert Woodruff Professor of Biomedical Engineering and on the faculty in the Department of Pathology, Biomedical Informatics, Urology, Radiation Oncology, Radiology and Imaging Sciences, Global Health, and Computer and Information Sciences at Emory University. He is a researcher with the Cancer Immunology Program at the Winthrop Cancer Center and also a research career scientist at the Atlanta Veterans Administration Medical Center. He's authored over 500 peer-reviewed publications, 200 patents. He's involved in medical imaging analysis and is a fellow of not only the FNAI, but IEEE, IAAS. And so his work on smart imaging computers, identifying lung cancer patients who needed chemotherapy, was named as one of the top 10 medical breakthroughs of 2018 by Prevention Magazine. And he was recognized as one of the 5 scientists developing offbeat and innovative approaches. So his resume is really outstanding, as is the entire panel. So if you really want to read more, you can go online to the FNAI conference site and see more details about their bios. So I would like to start with the following question. So Dr. Madabhushi, how is AI revolutionizing diagnosis and treatment in ways that were unthinkable even 5 years ago?
Great. Thank you for that question. So perhaps before I sort of launch in, maybe a little bit of background, a little bit of context to what I do and sort of where the field has been going over the last, not just 5 years, but really over the last 20 years. So my group has been very interested in the use of artificial intelligence, machine vision, machine learning from routinely acquired data, radiology scans, pathology scans. And about 20 years ago, we started using these approaches to help in better detection, better diagnosis of diseases. But then gradually we appreciated that there was so much information in these standard routine radiographic images and pathology images that not only could we look at helping radiologists and pathologists with better identification of the disease, we could actually do more. We could start to predict outcome for these diseases. We could start to predict which treatments these patients were going to benefit from and which patients were going to respond to. And so, Helen, coming back to your question about what has really happened over the last 5 years, I think we're starting to see a significant shift in the way the industry and the way developers are looking at problems in health and medicine beyond just diagnostics. So there's been this focus on disease diagnostics and the role of AI for breast cancer screening and lung cancer screening. But we're starting to appreciate that there's such a big opportunity to address questions around precision medicine. And I think the most exciting thing in the last 5 years is that we actually have a shot at precision medicine with the use of artificial intelligence. So let me try to break that down a little bit. As we talk about precision medicine, a term that gets thrown around quite a bit, it's important to understand what that really means. It means that we need to appreciate that no two patients with the same disease may respond to treatments in the same way. And prostate cancer is a great example, where 1 in 7 men will be diagnosed with prostate cancer, but only 1 in 40 will actually die on account of the disease. And prostate cancer is a great use case where we see that some men may have very indolent disease, where they end up dying with the disease, as opposed to dying on account of the disease. So being able to identify which patients have the more aggressive disease versus the less aggressive disease means that we can modulate the therapy that is being administered to those two men in a differential way, and AI clearly will play a role. So what has happened over the last 5 years is that companies are now appreciating that AI could play a role in this precision medicine, in this more informed, AI-informed treatment decision making. And perhaps the big breakthrough for the community was about 1.5 years ago, where a company, Artera, I have nothing to do with the company, actually was able to validate an AI-based test based off pathology images alone that allowed us to now identify which patients with prostate cancer were going to benefit from hormonal therapy versus those patients that could avoid hormonal therapy, because hormonal therapy does have its side effects. And not just that, the company was then able to take this test and convinced the oncology community that this was a test that clinicians had to use. And they were able to make the argument successfully to embed the AI test into the national guidelines. In other words, a doctor or an oncologist treating a prostate cancer patient now might have to use the AI test to decide what the right course of treatment for this patient is, because it's now encoded into the NCCN guidelines. And to me, that is where I think the field is going. We're going beyond diagnosis to now focusing more around prognosis and predictive medicine with the use of powerful technologies like AI.
So are there discoveries AI has enabled that challenge established medical knowledge or protocols?
So, Helen, I think that's a little bit more of a complicated question. And I think there's a lot of hope and aspirations that we will be able to discover a lot more than is currently known with AI. And I think that there are some suggestions, some signs that AI is enabling new discoveries. Right now, one of the big, most sort of buzzworthy topics in AI is this concept of agents, where you've got multiple different AI agents that could potentially collaborate and break down a very large, complex problem by essentially having multiple agents look at different facets of the problem and discover insights that perhaps were not previously known. And Google has recently published on some of this. Some of the academic groups have started to suggest that there might be insights we might be able to uncover. And I think while these initial discoveries seem very promising, I think that we just need to take that with a little bit of a pinch of salt. I think we need to look at that a little cautiously, because I actually feel that there is a vast amount of knowledge that we have accumulated over the last 200-300 years, particularly in the field of medicine, that perhaps we're not leveraging to the full extent. And so my approach has been that, why don't we potentially use AI first to truly understand and appreciate and take advantage of the deep vertical well of knowledge that exists in health, in medicine. Having said that, there are a number of other companies and a number of groups that are looking at the use of AI for things like drug discovery. Of course, AI won the Nobel Prize for discovery of protein structure through AlphaFold and so on. So, I think there's certainly room for new discoveries, but I just tend to look at it with a little bit of qualification that we need to first appreciate the deep well of knowledge that does exist, and let's make sure that AI is taking advantage of that. And then once we are truly taking advantage of the vast repositories of knowledge that exist, then I think there's an opportunity to now really dig deeper, dig further, and make new discoveries, particularly in terms of designing new drugs and finding new therapeutics. And some of these are in clinical trials, and I think that is really wonderful. But that, I feel like the jury's still out on sort of really a seismic discovery that AI has enabled. I don't think we're quite there yet, but hopefully in the next 5 years there will be some new seminal discoveries that were not apparent to us that will primarily be generated with AI.
Yeah, this isn't on the script, so I'm going to go off script for a moment. But I have an interest in digital twins. Are you using any of that, or what is your opinion on using it for medical applications, in particular personalized medicine?
No, our group has not explicitly worked on the concept of digital twins, but I know that both at Emory University and at Georgia Tech, there's a lot of work going on in this field. And I think that this is a very rich opportunity, particularly for physicians at so many levels, to be able to look at these digital avatars of a patient and really start to think about treatment regimens, start to think about treatment planning. An area that I work on is cancer, and specifically the application of AI in cancer. And having met several cancer patients, and of course, having seen cancer personally in my family as well, I know that beyond the stigma of being diagnosed with cancer, there is also a highly complex pathway that the patient has to traverse. And to me, the opportunity with things like digital twins, AI-informed digital twins, is that we have an opportunity to serve as a concierge for these cancer patients, really helping them on their journey, and at the same time, providing this model to the physician, to the oncologist, to be able to better help and better plan what are the appropriate therapies, what are the appropriate strategies. But I do think that is exactly part of the future. We're not quite there yet. But I do think that those kinds of innovations, hopefully in the next 5 years, will start to become very much part and parcel of the clinic.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, I'd like to pursue that conversation. I won't take the time now, but that was great. Thank you. All right, so now we're going to move on to another area. So, Professor Heck, what has been the most surprising or impactful use of voice AI in human-computer interaction?
So to answer that question, let me give a little bit of a context, brief history of voice AI. So way back in the 90s at SRI, at Stanford Research Institute, in the speech group there, we were trying to build an agentic AI system. So this was 95. And it was called the Open Agents Architectures, and it was an office assistant for SRI. And one of the really big challenges with getting that going was voice recognition, speech recognition. And so one of the persons that was working on this, who subsequently was the founder for Siri, which is a spin-out from SRI, his name is Adam Chire, spent most of his days hanging out with us in the speech group, trying to get things to work. So fast forward a little bit, so at SRI also there was a project, I think it was probably the largest AI-funded voice AI effort in history called CALO, C-A-L-O, and that was in the 2004, 5, 6, 7 range, and that had about 20 different institutions involved. And CALO stands for Cognitive Agent That Learns and Organizes. And so the idea was that you'd have an agent that could join a meeting like this, or a business meeting where you have people sitting around the table. Agent could not only transcribe everything that's going on, but understand it and participate. Okay, so I'll come back to that application in a second, but that was a research project that ran into all kinds of issues, which for its time was wonderful because there were a bunch of researchers working on this. So the architect, the chief architect for CALO is Adam Chire. He went out, started Siri. I left SRI and I went to Microsoft and started Cortana and hired a bunch of people from SRI to start that project. So in terms of most impactful area of voice AI, probably even still today, it's probably voice search, just in terms of the number of queries. You know, the early days of actually just being able to speak your search query. But of course, that led into personal assistants like Siri, Cortana, and especially Alexa. With Alexa's penetration of devices currently, the number of devices that they have in homes throughout the world, they're in a position not only to leverage the data that they already have, but as they're going through right now, they're transforming to the use of large language models, so it's much more conversational. And I'm a beta tester for them. So I think Amazon Alexa is going to have a very significant impact very shortly. I think it's called Echo 15, just because they have devices everywhere, and it kind of lends itself much more to voice when you're walking around your living room or your kitchen than when you're sitting in front of the keyboard. So that's in terms of most impactful. I think the most surprising voice AI application is, it goes back to the CALO effort, but now there are actually companies that are putting products out there like that. And so one of them is called Otter.ai. And Otter, if you've used it, it's the default transcription service for Zoom. And it'll transcribe, initially it would just transcribe your conversations. And the people that started Otter came out of the Google Speech team, and the Google Speech team came from, I was at Nuance, my team there started Google Speech, and then I went, Microsoft became chief scientist. But from the Google Speech team, they started Otter.ai, and they've evolved over time. And so just about 2 months ago, they released a evolution, which is it's a personal assistant that can attend meetings, take notes, and actively participate, and in fact, even proactively participate in the conversations in meetings. And I say that surprising because it is a culmination of technology and efforts that's been going on for the last 20, 25 years, but it's now in product and it's available. So that's super exciting as I see it.
So related to what you've been saying, what is, how close are we really to truly understanding or fully understanding human intent and emotion through voice, and what are the current limitations to understanding that? Right,
so understanding intent has been the focus of the community in voice AI forever. However, the intent that's understood, and it is actually well understood right now with products like large language model products like ChatGPT and others, in a neutral tone. If you express something that's in the form of sarcasm or an emotional state, while today's technology can detect what kind of state you're in, if it's sarcastic or if it's an emotional, it can detect what kind of emotion, but it struggles to understand what you mean. I have a PhD student working on this right now, where what we're trying to do is to take, let's say, a sarcastic comment of a movie review and be able to still extract knowledge from that review. So the review might be something like, the best part of that movie was the popcorn and Coke, so it's not clear in the current technology, that means it was a terrible movie. But if we can transform or rewrite that review into a neutral tone, then we can actually use it rather than what's done right now, which is essentially throw it away or ignore it. So we're doing a lot of work in that area, and we're, pivoting, just like machine translation, we're translating these utterances to neutral tone. So there's still a lot of work to go on that side.
And closely related to what we've been discussing, how close or what are the risks of voice AI being used in deceptive or manipulative ways, and how would you mitigate that? Not to make this a negative conversation, but those questions do come up.
Absolutely.
So what would you suggest?
So when I was working in speech, my focus area was voice authentication. So I worked on that for a long time. I was funded by the NSA. NIST sponsored evaluations for many years, which I helped set up in '96. At that time, it was all acoustic-based. And of course, these days, that's not sufficient. And even to the point where I was invited to a meeting of all of the police chiefs for the ACC schools here at Georgia Tech. So we had all of the ACC schools and their police chiefs here. And I was invited to be on a panel to talk about this threat, which is synthetically creating a student's voice and then calling that student's parents with this synthetic voice and saying, Mom, they've kidnapped me, you got to send money, this sort of thing. Of course, it's all synthetic. And so I got a fellow Georgia Tech alum who works at NSA right now to come and join me. And that's a very real issue, according to the police chiefs right now, with the technology as it is. And I think similar to what we were, doing early on, developing technology, I think there's a similar kind of response to that, and that's knowledge verification associated with the person. So, but in this case, it has to be done, this knowledge verification has to be done by, let's say, the parent that gets the phone call and their child calls. So really that means awareness. People have to be aware that the technology can actually do that. And if they get a call from their child at college, then they ask some questions, knowledge-based questions, to make sure that they can confirm that that really is their daughter or son.
I hate to ask the negative questions because I always get asked questions about AI and people being afraid of it and being used. So thank you for that. And if people are online, like you could use biometrics to really look at emotion when you were talking about emotion or verification. But even there, AI can step in and have a false image. So, but intent is really important too, even in finances, because more written there. I was on a board of directors of a medical company, and they always looked at the way the CEO would do the quarterly reports and what changed in their language. Okay, so how were they able to see whether what they're saying is really reflective of what's going on?
Yeah, and just to add to that, way back in '93, I went out to Langley. It was still a white project, not classified, but what they were doing at Langley at NSA was they had their VCR with their VHS tapes of recordings of leaders, world leaders like Fidel Castro at the time, and they would watch speeches that were given. But it was very much multimodal in the sense that they would try to pick up visual cues from how he was actually delivering the speech. And so I think that's a really good point. I think and especially right now, if you're building AI systems these days, you need to be considering using all the modalities, vision as well as speech, to determine intent and emotion.
Exactly. When I was at CIA, they were very concerned about foreign leaders. How did their speech patterns change?
Right.
Where are they really headed? So it's all related for different applications, but it's exciting. So speaking of things like speech and understanding text, we're going to move on to OpenAI. And how many of you have used ChatGPT or something similar? Okay. So, yes, you have, right? So, Dr. Myles, what are the most pressing legal challenges in AI right now, especially when innovation outpaces policy?
Well, we could probably do like an entire panel just on that.
Yeah.
Because there are a lot of pressing legal issues right now. But I'm going to call out kind of 3 buckets that I think are important. One is just the pace mismatch. Like law and policy generally lag behind technology, but right now the innovation is happening so incredibly quickly that the legal system, like, honestly doesn't really know what to do. And I would say that, like, in some respects, you want there to be kind of that lag in between what is happening and how the law is evolving, but you don't want that gap to get too big, and we're kind of at a risk of that happening at the moment. Because we want that gap so that the law can evolve thoughtfully, so our policies can evolve thoughtfully, so we understand what the technology is doing before we just start imposing laws and policies on things. But we have to be really careful right now as to what's happening. And that's, kind of on the thoughts of new laws, new policies. But the other struggle that we're having is just taking existing laws and applying them to the technology. And so I think 2 good examples of that are privacy and IP laws. On the privacy front, I've recently seen a bunch of stories about how people are using chat-based technology, and they're really having deep conversations. They're having conversations about physical and mental health issues. They're having conversations about relationships. These conversations that they probably don't feel comfortable having with another person, but it's unclear, how much privacy do they have in the conversations they're having with these tools. We don't have something that is equivalent to attorney-client privilege or a confidentiality that you have with a doctor. And so I think that's something that we need to think hard about, and we need to understand how people are using the technology and what we should be protecting, and have a reasonable scope so that people can use the tools in a really meaningful way for them. So that's one of the buckets. The other one is just kind of the regulatory fragmentation. And what we're seeing is that different countries are approaching this in different ways. So the US and the EU are thinking about laws in somewhat different ways. And then even within the US, states are looking at it differently and looking to regulate it differently. And this creates a lot of problems from a compliance perspective for companies. It makes it very difficult for them. It makes it difficult to do any kind of model deployment. Can this model be used in one country and not another? Or in the worst situation, can it only be used in one state and not another? Mm-hmm. So we need to deal with that issue. And I think then the other part that comes out of that is that it can just create an uneven playing field. It can make it so that some users can take advantage of technology that others don't. And that could create problems around the globe, and is particularly important to us as a company, as we want our tool to benefit everybody. And we want it to benefit everybody equally. We don't want it so that maybe some user in California has better tools than somebody in another country. So that's the second one. And then the third one is this idea around open versus closed systems. And there's definitely advantages and disadvantages to both of them. On the open system, people are advocating for, we want the systems to be transparent. We want to be able to fully understand what they're doing. We want to be able to replicate the evaluations that are being done, and a lot of value in that. But then there's the side where when you're super transparent, we have to worry about the safety and how the models are being used and what people will be able to do with them if you just put out an open weight model and there's like no protection on them. You know, how do we deal with that? So those, I think, are kind of the three big buckets.
Related to what you're saying, and this is a discussion I teach an AI course for graduate students, and the question always comes up, should government regulate policies regarding AI? So what is your opinion on that? If it's unfair to ask you, it's okay, you can pass, but...
I might give kind of a dodged answer. I think that there is a role. I don't think that we can say they shouldn't be involved at all. I don't think that they should have the only role. But this is AI is going to impact everybody. And so I think everybody needs to be involved.
Yeah, and it was like when we were talking about autonomous vehicles earlier, right? And autonomous trucking isn't really taking off as much as it should or could. Maybe it could, because states have different regulations. So some states will allow you to do just a certain kind of road or mileage, but some states require the driver always to be present, for example, so it can't be totally autonomous. So questions come up from that, would it be better just to have a federal regulation maybe for autonomous trucking so that they can freely go from state to state? But I really do share your opinion about, you have to be careful with regulations, what they would regulate. So how do you think about intellectual property when AI systems are co-creators or autonomous discoverers?
This is a question I think about all the time. As an IP lawyer, this is exactly one of the issues that I have to worry about. We are a company producing IP. I have to think about how to protect that IP. But we're also an AI company creating tools that generate new content, and our teams use those tools to generate the company's IP. So I very much think about this all the time. I think that one of the big ones is this idea of inventorship and authorship. And can we use patents or copyrights in order to protect inventions and creative expressions if the IP systems are involved? Right now, the answer is kind of yes, with the way that the systems currently work, because what's required is that there's a human that is participating either in that invention or in that creative expression. And that's a lot of what is happening. Humans they're using the tools in order to, help them think a little harder or refine ideas, but they're still very much in the loop right now. But it is becoming more and more of an issue as the systems become more autonomous. One of the things that I think isn't totally settled at the moment is like what level of involvement is necessary. Like we know that if the human is just giving a basic prompt to a system and the system spits out something, that's not enough involvement. But we don't know like exactly where that line is that it crosses over from not enough to enough. How detailed of a prompt do you have to give? How much curation of that content is that sweet spot? And so one of the examples that is really top of mind for me is around software creation. These tools are getting really good at writing software. They can write small programs entirely on their own. It's wonderful. I get to use it with my kids. We create things. And that's great, but it comes down to then, well, how as a company do we protect that? Am I worried about that? And I'll say to a small degree, I'm a little bit worried, but not that much. And that's because there's often an assumption that what you are applying in order to protect, say, software is copyright. And yeah, that's true. And in some cases, there's going to be pieces of that software that will no longer be protected by copyright because they were written entirely by an AI system. But we have other mechanisms as well. So I think about, when I think about protecting a software invention, I don't just think about copyright. I think about patents. And so the human right now is still kind of involved in that overall inventive concept, which is the piece that's protectable through a patent. I also think about trade secrets, and is this something that would be better protected through a trade secret as opposed to one of the other mechanisms? And so that's, I think, what is shifting, is kind of how are we applying these various forms of IP to the creations that we're making, and maybe skewing a little bit more towards patents or trade secrets as opposed to relying exclusively on copyrights, as the case is for software. And so I think going forward, that's what we need to do. We need to think about how do we balance these things, and then we also need to think about pushing for the law to evolve so that it maps to both what we as a society want to protect and also how we're using the tools.
When you were talking about coding, the cute story I'll share is that running the AI lab, we have a robotic arm that plays chess, right? But we wanted to develop coding for it. And so I went on OpenAI and I said, can you give me a Python code? And I told it what it was for. And the thing that impressed me is they came back and asked questions like, what level do you want to play? But it was really getting down into questions that were really relevant to making that software applicable. So I was impressed, but I tell my students too that they should check the code, verify it to make sure it really works. And
yeah, I think that's true with anything you're getting from AI. It's similar to like research that people do, what you read on the internet. You have to verify. You have to make sure that it's accurate, that it isn't hallucinating.
Right. And so the rest of the story is we did apply the code, and nobody has beat that robotic arm yet. So anyway, we're going to move on to questions that involve the entire panel. And one is, and Dr. Heck, you volunteered during our discussion to start this off. Would you start the discussion for what role should cross-domain collaboration play in future AI innovation, and what is really lacking now to push that forward?
Yeah, it's a great question. A little over 10 years ago, when I was in Microsoft Research, there was a growing movement within the computer science community to cross over to specific areas, especially medicine, as a computer scientist, and to try to make an impact there by coming up to speed on whatever the medical problem was. And that frankly came out of frustration because the computer science tools at the time were not really being very well leveraged by the medical community. And so there was a lot of work on that. And but of course that's going to be very limited because computer science is not trained in radiation oncology and other areas. And so there's you're going to be what the real opportunity right now for cross-domain collaboration is to flip it around and to start with a domain expert that may not necessarily be world-class software engineer, but they are world-class radiation oncologists. They know all about the area. In fact, my brother-in-law is doing that right now, and he has a technical background enough that he has been exposed to coding, is decent on coding. To me, that's just a magical marriage between the domain expert and the tools that Gideon was just talking about on the software engineering code assist. It's not so much, taking a computer science software engineer and then amplifying them with these AI code assist. Of course, that helps, but that person already has a lot of the skills. They're not as complemented. But what's really exciting is this cross-domain opportunity where you have a domain expert that has, let's say in radiation oncology, that has some background in coding, and then you team them up with an AI code assist. And just to say a little bit more on that, I'm spending a lot of time myself right now coding with a coding assistant, 12 hours a day kind of thing. And I can tell you that the coding assist technology today, unless you're doing something relatively simple, still needs a lot of human guidance. And you have to really understand how to use the technology for it to be effective. And most of that guidance is not so much down in the low-level code. The guidance is more at the level of strategic, architectural guidance, because you're the domain expert, you know the area, and you're having this conversation at that level, and that you're allowing the AI code assist to do the low-level programming for you. But you can't just, explain some really complex kind of task and expect that at least today's technology is going to do a good job of putting the code together. So to me, that's just a fantastic opportunity for this cross-domain. But it's to take the domain expert and then empower them with these AI code assists, for example.
So since Professor Heck mentioned medical applications, Dr. Madabhushi, would you like to address that question?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, this is, multidisciplinary collaborations is the world that I live and breathe in on a daily basis. And I think you mentioned I've been very privileged to, my primary faculty appointment is in biomedical engineering, but I have the privilege of also having secondary appointments in radiology, pathology, rad-onc, and several other clinical departments. And I'll give a little bit of context here. I trained as a biomedical engineer. And when I started my faculty position, I thought I knew the problem that had to be solved. I started work in prostate cancer, then breast cancer. I lost an aunt due to breast cancer. And I thought I knew exactly the problem that had to be solved. Apply AI to looking at MRI scans or biopsy images and tell you whether there was cancer there. That was going to benefit radiologists. If I could do it from biopsy images, I could benefit the pathologist. So we'd done a bunch of work. And I remember my aha moment about the importance of multidisciplinary collaborations in AI was in 2008, when I met a breast oncologist, Sridhar Ganesan, and I was showing him the work that we'd done with machine learning and using it for breast cancer diagnosis and breast cancer grading. And I remember Dr. Ganesan at that point looked at me and said, Anant, what you're doing is fabulous. But as an oncologist who treats breast cancer patients, unfortunately, this is of no use to me. And I said, why? He said, well, I need to know who is going to benefit from chemotherapy and who can successfully avoid chemotherapy. Mm-hmm. In other words, the work that you're doing is fabulous, but it doesn't benefit me as a clinician. And that's when, for the first time, I realized that as a machine learning engineer, I thought of prediction as a way of predicting something. But the way clinicians think of predictive is quite different. Predictive in the clinical sense means really being able to predict benefit of therapy, response to therapy. And that was sort of my aha moment. And it was in those conversations I realized that I needed to pivot from looking at machine learning solely from a diagnostic perspective to identify the presence or absence of disease to now really thinking about it from a predictive perspective, identifying who's going to benefit from certain therapies and who can avoid therapies. And I think over the last 17 odd years, I've come to appreciate the importance of these multidisciplinary collaborations, and I'll mention one more example that came about because of these multidisciplinary collaborations. One of the things that our group has worked on has been to try to identify which lung cancer patients will benefit from treatments like immunotherapy. Immunotherapy has changed the landscape of how we treat cancer patients, was awarded the Nobel Prize back in 2018. Unfortunately, there are two challenges. One, in spite of the fact that in patients who do respond to immunotherapy, the vast majority of patients still don't benefit from immunotherapy. It's only about 25% of cancer patients that will achieve a sustained response to immunotherapy. Secondly, these treatments are expensive, costing $250,000 per patient per year, resulting in no indirect way in a lot of the financial toxicity we see because of cancer. And so what we started to realize was we needed to use AI to identify who was going to benefit from immunotherapy or not. But we also wanted to develop algorithms that were going to be explainable and interpretable to the physician. And so we started to collaborate with surgeons, with radiologists, and in the mid 2015, 2016, we came up with the discovery that by using AI, we could tease out the vasculature associated with lung cancer on a CT scan. And by analyzing how twisted or tortuous it was, we could now figure out which patients were going to benefit from immunotherapy and which patients were not. In fact, the discovery we made collectively because of this multidisciplinary collaboration was that those lung cancer patients with more twisted vessels were unlikely to respond to immunotherapy, but patients who had smoother vasculature actually were the ones who were going to respond to immunotherapy. And this was a discovery that could only have happened because of the constant exchange and dialogue that was happening between the biomedical engineers, the scientists, and the physicians. And today, as we look at the medical landscape and we look at AI technologies, over 1,000 AI technologies in the medical space have been approved by the FDA. And yet, when you actually look at the number of invocations of AI technologies in the clinic, there's a huge chasm between the hype and the actual adoption in the clinic. The number one AI technology that's actually being used, I think this is HeartFlow, is only used about 70,000 times a year, right? And you think about the number of CPT codes and CPT invocations that happen on an annual basis, it runs into the billions. So that's quite a startling statistic, and I think a big part of that is the lack of explainability, the lack of interpretability. And so the need for the multidisciplinary collaboration is that you need to have buy-in from your end user, the clinician. They need to buy into this. And really the only way to do that is to make sure that they are part of the process in the development and the validation of these algorithms. And the final point I'll make here as we talk about multidisciplinary collaborations, and just building off what Larry said, we need to work together, there's no question. But it's easier said than done. How do you get AI scientists, computer scientists, and radiation oncologists, medical oncologists to collaborate and work together? It doesn't just happen. Yes, we all want them to work together, but they speak different languages. And one of the things I've come to appreciate over the last 2 decades is the importance of multilinguality, right? Being able to speak the language in terms of what a medical oncologist or radiation oncologist might think about. And similarly, by the same token, make sure that the physician or the clinician that you're working with has an appreciation, even if it's rudimentary, about what the AI can do and also critically what it can't do. Because I think, unfortunately, a lot of people, as much as I love ChatGPT, it can't solve all the problems of the world. It cannot, you can't trust the diagnosis. And so there needs to be an appreciation from the clinical community as to what the limits of the AI technologies are. And so this has been one of the critical pieces, is making sure that as we talk about these multidisciplinary collaborations, the importance for the AI engineers to appreciate the clinical context, to appreciate the clinical problem, and to make sure you're making an effort to speak in the lingua franca of the clinical context and the clinical problem being solved.
So I've been told to save 15 minutes for audience questions. So we're nearing that time, but I'd like to do one final question for the panel, and that is, we're going to fast forward, okay? It's 10 years from now. What area will AI-enabled discovery have the most significant impact, and what will be the most extreme innovation that it will enable? So, Dr. Myles, would you like to start? So we have 3 minutes.
I can probably be pretty short. 10 years in the AI space right now is like multiple lifetimes.
Yep.
So I'm not sure that I can totally, I don't know what's going to happen in 10 years, but I'll tell you what I am excited about and what I'm hoping for. And that's really advances in healthcare, as have been talked about extensively. I'm really, really excited about that. I'm also excited about what we can do within the education space, and particularly around customizing learning plans for people who learn differently, because our school systems don't have the resources to be able to truly address the different learning needs of kids. So I'm really excited about that. And I'm excited about the advances in software automation, not because of, wanting the company to be able to do better or create more software, but because it makes it more accessible to everybody. And I think that people will be able to do really cool things with it.
So, Dr. Heck, do you have anything to add?
Yeah,
we
so-
can make it a shorter time.
Yeah,
than 10
I
years.
think my answer is probably a little surprising in that I actually think 10 years from now, humans will still be very much in the mix. And I think the most innovative area is education is one of those, which is making humans better using AI. But another is empowering humans to give them superpowers, kind of like a virtual Iron Man suit, for whatever they want to do. If they're in the medical field or scientific discovery or even AI scientists. I think it's a false narrative when people talk about, AGI. They usually talk about humans or AI. But to me, the most powerful, and in 10 years from now, is humans plus AI. And it's empowering humans to, do things that we can't even imagine right now.
Okay, and Dr. Madabhushi, would you like to wrap up that conversation?
Yeah, sure. I mean, again, I'll keep it in the medical field. I think 10 years from now, the vision that I have is that a patient walks into the clinic, maybe they're a cancer patient, they've had a biopsy, they've had a scan, they're going in to meet their oncologist, and the oncologist is able to, show them essentially a digital twin, a digital avatar, essentially of the patient with deep analysis done of their genomics, of their pathology, of their radiology. The AI has essentially integrated, assimilated all of that information, has gone through all the literature, all the trials, and basically come up with detailed treatment plans, looked at the likelihood of response for multiple different medications, and then has come up with a personalized treatment regimen for that particular patient, and is providing options to the physician, so that the physician now is really spending time talking to the patient, taking them through all of this data, helping them try to provide sort of the pros and cons. So really sort of focusing on the grunt work, the analysis, is being completely handled by the AI. AI has put out, options for that particular patient, but I still think that there will be the physician will be very much in the mix, and it'll be a conversation between physician and patient with this armory of data to then decide on what the right treatment course might be.
Okay, well, I definitely agree with the panel. I think healthcare is going to have the greatest impact on education. Absolutely. And then I'll put one when we're out there that we didn't address, and that's global supply chains. And not just because I just finished writing a book on it, but I really think that is really going to be an area. So why don't we move on to the audience? So you've been sitting very patiently through all this, and I hope you're learning and enjoying it. So what are your questions?
We do have one question, and I encourage others to submit if you have something you'd like to ask. This question addresses sort of the reliability and current availability of sample sizes for healthcare applications. Can you just discuss the maybe currently low sample size and how to handle both increasing the sample size and data and information that goes into these AI predictive models, as well as concerns about addressing incorrect or incomplete predictions?
Yeah, so should I take that, maybe?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, great. Sorry,
He's
I didn't want
taking
to,
a picture,
I didn't want to
so I'm
presume.
posing.
I didn't want to presume, but you were looking at me, so. Well, I think my response to that is that seems to be the immediate instinctive reaction that when we talk about AI, it's millions of data points. And I think certainly the millions of data points has allowed us to build some very powerful foundation models. And I think that's certainly going to be valuable. But I have a slightly contrarian perspective here. I do think that even small amounts of data, but the right data, might actually help us get much further along in being able to build predictive tools for patients. I'll give you an example there. A lot of the work going on in our lab has been to try to build, like I said, predictive models for who's going to benefit from chemotherapy, who might benefit from immunotherapy. I'll tell you that these predictive models that we're building are very frugal in the sense that they are built of training set sizes that are maybe 100 patients. And using 100 patients, we're able to learn patterns and find the right features that now allow us to predict who will benefit from a certain treatment versus patients who potentially could avoid that particular therapy. So I think it's about the right data sets and not always the size of the data set. But having said that, I think what is going to be really critical as we think about sample sizes is making sure that there's representation. I think this is really, really critical. And more than having a large N, I think having a plurality of sites, a plurality of populations represented in those sample sizes, I think is going to be really critical for us to be able to build models that extend to multiple diverse patient populations.
Does that answer your question? Or does somebody have another question?
So
That was a great answer.
I think this is to everyone on the panel. What are your predictions for how interactions with AI are going to change? You mentioned about, again, sort of the uptake and the amount of people who are using AI. What innovations do you see forthcoming in interfaces and interactions to integrate more with our daily lives?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the interfaces that we have right now with the AI are not that good. If you think about the amount of knowledge and the speed of knowledge transfer back and forth between the human and the AI going through, your thumbs or a keyboard on a chat, it's going to be very limited. It's like talking through a straw or something. And what we're seeing right now is technology is able to actually use images as well as just streaming video and voice. It's just that the interfaces have not been built around that yet. It's available, so I think that's going to be coming very shortly, so that it's much more like having a conversation with a hearing, seeing, speaking human, and so that you can interact by not just text or even not just with voice, but with imagery. And I think that people tend to underestimate the difficulty in building a really good interface. And I've been working on this forever and made a lot of mistakes through the years. You assume that people want to interact with the AI in a particular way, probably because that's the way you would interact with it. But most people are not AI scientists like myself. So the interaction needs to be very natural. And one thing I'd say is that, for a long time in voice, the assumption was voice in, voice out. That's the way to go. And, I really don't think that that's typically, the best interface. It's typically, voice in, full visual and voice and everything back, so that if you're asking for some information, that you have a very rich response. Not if it's just voice and it's a long list of things that you've asked about, then you have to go sequentially through each one, as opposed to sort of showing it in the screen, having a voice to say, well, here's here's all of the different hotels I found in Italy for your vacation, as opposed to listing them one by one. So it's that kind of UI, I think, still is to be developed.
Yeah, I would fully agree with that. Our interface right now is limited and limiting what we're able to do. And where I see it going is it just becoming just kind of part of the environment, and more in the background, and able to respond, detect what it is that you need, and do it for you. Multimodal, simultaneously taking in all the senses and outputting them in a way that is more natural.
I could take a crack at that as well. I think that the UI piece is going to be very important. Again, I'm looking at it from a clinical health medicine perspective. And I talked about sort of this futuristic vision where the physician is talking to the patient and going through various different options where the AI in the background has ingested and analyzed and interrogated all the data and then come up with some suggestions. But I think from a patient perspective, that has to be provided in a digestible, consumable way. And I think what we lack is the user interface that is able to not just provide that patient about their information, but being able to provide it in the context of thousands of patients, hundreds of thousands of patients, being able to look at, the AI has analyzed your data, and why I think you need to go with this particular treatment option is because if you look at where you land in the context of 100,000 patients who previously had this particular disease, these were the various different treatment options that were provided based off your clinical features, your age. This is where you land. And patients who look like you or have had a similar disease, when they went with option A, they had the best outcome. And so this is where, this is the recommendation. I think that is not only going to be very compelling visualization for a physician, but I think it's really going to get our patients really engaged and understand and appreciate, where and how the decision making is being done. And so I think that, to me, will be a big part of providing the AI-based predictions in a more digestible and friendly fashion to the physician and the patient.
Also another question is, what are your predictions about convergence or emergence or consolidation, I guess, in this AI space among the industry players and the technologies that are coming forward?
So do you mean a consolidation of companies, for example, or emergence? I actually think we're still in the very early days. I was just out in San Francisco first 2 weeks of June talking to a lot of different VCs, and I'm sure, Gideon, you're very much aware of this in the front row seats of this, but the number of startups right now in this space is just tremendous. Anything that you can think of that might be done is being done and pitched to VCs right now. So I still think I think we're still in this phase of expansion and emergence. There's a number of companies that we haven't heard of yet that are going to emerge as being big players. Before, I don't think we're in the stage yet of we're going to pick between the 3 and then it's going to go down to 2 and 1. It's more like this. I think that's probably going to continue for at least the next few years, maybe the next 5 years.
I 100% agree with that. It's often posed to me as kind of like, where are we on the curve? Are we still on the upward trajectory? Are we at a plateau, or are we on the downward? And I very much think we're still making our way up, maybe halfway up. I don't think we're anywhere near the plateau. I think we have several more years of expansion. I kind of think about it a little bit like the dot-com growth. We haven't made it to the bursting of the bubble yet, and I think we have time. And we're going to see some cool stuff come out of it.
Yeah, just to add to that, I mean, a big reason for this, I think, is because of the tools that are being put out by companies like OpenAI and others. Is just incredible. It's so empowering to even individuals that want to build a little company.
So I think in the medical AI space, I think it's a little different, right? Because one of the challenges with medical AI is that if you're going to use it in patients, you still need to go through regulatory approval, right? So you go to the FDA, or you set yourself up as a lab-developed test, in which case you need a CLIA-based lab. So it's a little different. And again, I go back to the anecdote I mentioned about the chasm between the actual adoption of these approved technologies and the number of companies out there. There's so many different companies, like Larry just mentioned, even in the medical AI space. So I think it's still evolving. It's unclear to me how much this sort of idea of a single company, with a single product and sort of having a big IPO, whether that's sort of going to be the way forward, or is there going to be an opportunity for mergers One of the ideas that's been put forward by sort of some of the OEMs in this space, like the Siemens, the Philips, and related companies, is to create a marketplace, right? So you've got an app store, and you come and put your app in the store, and then there's sort of a licensing model. That may be the way forward. I think the providers are going to play a significant role in this space because ultimately the providers are the ones that will dictate the usage of these AI tools, and I think the Mayos of the world are appreciating and understanding this. And so I think that we're going to start to see a lot more collaboration between the vendors and the providers. The nature of how that marriage will go is still evolving, but I think that this idea of a marketplace is, I think, one that seems to be getting some traction. And so we'll probably see that as one of the vehicles to further deploy and disseminate going forward.
So I think that pretty much wraps up the time. And before we thank the panel, I'd just like to leave you with one thought that's exciting. Well, I think it's exciting. I asked everybody to fast forward 10 years from now, but I think really it's unimaginable. And we can't even think about the kind of technologies and where AI is going to bring us. And to me, that's very exciting. So we'll just have to wait and see. But at this point, I'd like to give a round of applause to our panel. They were terrific.